for setting up the meeting and the invitation to speak. And if I can just pass on best wishes to PCS for the conference, and echoing a point that was made earlier, it is great to have Mark back. He is much missed in the movement, not least by me, because attending meetings of the TUC General Council may sound glamorous to you, but I can assure you it's not very often, and having one ally is better than having no allies. So it's not that bad, but sometimes it is pretty bleak. And just to pick up something that John said earlier about our unions doing well, the truth is we have campaigned, but I think if we're totally frank, none of us have done well. They have got away with murder over the past 7 years since the coalition came in, and there is a real challenge. And if the Tories do get back in, then we are going to have some real serious strategic discussions about what we do in those situations, and discussions that aren't simply about, as some in the trade union movement doing, well, they're the government, our job is now to cosy up with them and have some sort of dialogue with them. Got to talk to people in government, but equally you've got to try and get rid of the government sometimes as well. But this is it turns out this is the election about strong and stable or weak and wobbly, and I think that's one of the things that's emerging. This is Theresa May, who told us time and time again there will be no snap election, and then suddenly, when it suited her, called a snap election. This is the same party that brought us the fixed-term Parliament legislation, saying that government shouldn't be allowed to manipulate the timing of elections to suit themselves, and then at the very first opportunity, dumped it, and very cynically chose to run an election precisely at the time that they thought suited them best. And it is utter disgrace and cynical, and they should be exposed for that. I have to say, I'm not sure that, I think they should have been challenged more about what they did in terms of calling the election. They should have been forced to have a vote of no confidence in themselves if they wanted to run an election. But they clearly chose it on two grounds. One is Brexit, and the other one is the Labour Party. And on Brexit, and I know there's different views in the room on Brexit, but it was inevitable, once the EU referendum voted to leave, that the Brexit negotiations are going to be utter mayhem for the British government, whoever that might be, because the departure from the EU means that every different national government will pursue what they see as their own national interests, and the EU bureaucracy will also pursue what they see as the interests of the EU, and inevitably there are going to be huge conflicts. The idea that this can be done easily and simply, I think, is naive and foolhardy. May estimated that actually the potentially nightmare scenario is that those negotiations conclude at the time of the scheduled general election, and actually she pays the price for it. So she has cynically decided to bring the election forward in order that hopefully, as she sees it, hopefully that once the worst of the Brexit negotiations out of the way, she's got a couple of years to try and rebuild for the following general election. So it's utterly cynical what they've done. And the other one, of course, is to exploit what they perceive as divisions in the Labour Party. We've got to bring, I think as trade unions, we've got to bring it back to our members, because there is a lot of debate and doubt, and I'll come on to some of the polls in a second, but we have to remind trade unionists, public sector workers, and those we live, work and go to the pub with, what their actual record is in terms of, you're a public sector union, we're a public sector union, what they have done to us. In the fire service, we have never in history faced the scale of cuts and destruction that they have unleashed over the past 7 years. Without any doubt, this is the worst period in the history of the modern fire service that we've ever faced under the coalition and then the Tories. These are the people who have come in and wrecked the pensions of our members, despite what they were promised by the last Labour government. And of course, these are the governments who have enforced unprecedented level of pay restraint, pay freeze, which of course for our members means that their real living standards have fallen. on an unprecedented scale, and are expected not to even, predicted not to recover until 2021 to get back to where we were before the banking crisis. That's the scale of what these people have done to us, and I can't see how any worker in their right mind in those circumstances could possibly consider voting for these people again. On top of that, as Mark said, and others have said, they launched the Trade Union Act because they still see, despite the weaknesses that we might have exhibited, and despite some of the failures in our movement, they still see that the trade unions represent a fundamental threat and a potential point of opposition to what they want to do if they are back in. So the truth is, we will expect more of the same if they get back in. And then on the other hand, you have Labour, and it's been said, I won't go into huge detail, a manifesto, and you may have criticism, I've got some criticisms of it, but actually it has completely turned the tide in terms of the political consensus that has been there for 30 years. The idea that you can't discuss renationalising rail, you can't discuss renationalising parts of our economy that have been privatised, the energy sector, the water sector and so on. You can't raise the idea of public ownership because it's unpopular. And actually it's proving the complete opposite. It is proving to be very, very popular. The idea that we don't want spibs running our public utilities, but why can't ordinary people, why can't communities and the nation as a whole have some say in how those utilities are delivered? For public sector workers, the idea that Labour will lift the pay freeze is a fantastic message to say. And just in terms of what Jeremy Corbyn has done in the 2 years that he's been in place, you can Google it. Google Labour and the pay freeze. And Chris Leslie, as recently as 2 years ago, just before that leadership election, was interviewed in the New Statesman saying Labour has to be a sensible opposition. And that means, yes, there are tough decisions to be made, and yes, that will mean supporting the public sector pay freeze. That was being said by someone who could have been Labour's shadow chancellor if that leadership election had gone differently. So now nobody in the Labour Party currently is saying anything remotely like that. But don't think those ideas have gone away. Those ideas have just been pushed to one side for a bit. But that shows the scale of what has been achieved in the past couple of years because of Jeremy Corbyn being elected as leader. And while we're on the polls, actually if you look at the poll trackers, and you can get various versions of this, there is a key turning point in Labour's position in the polls. And it's immediately after the EU referendum. And suddenly there is there was very close, 2-3% in the gap at the time. And suddenly a very marked departure and division in the fortunes of the Tories and Labour in the election. And there was one reason for that, and that is the coup that was launched against Corbyn in the aftermath of the election. And if there is a Tory government, and we look back at what caused this, then actually we have to say what really caused it. And it wasn't Jeremy Corbyn, it wasn't the hundreds of thousands of people who joined the Labour Party, it was other people who will have to look at what they did at that time, and I think should be helpful. Since then, we've had this relentless onslaught against Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell and the team around them. And there's the message here that it is bizarre when you get some people, unfortunately, in the Labour Party and the then Prime Minister David Cameron and the leader of the Liberal Democrats all demanding that Corbyn should go. It tells you something when the whole British establishment is telling the leader of the Labour Party to resign that he must be doing something bloody right. And I think it will get far, far nastier in the final couple of weeks. The onslaught against them will get far worse and far more personal and abusive as the election approaches. Because this actually, it's about Jeremy Corbyn, it's about John McDonnell, it's about Angela Rayner, whatever. But actually, it's about what they call Corbynism. And by that, I don't mean the particular policies that Jeremy Corbyn might put forward in this particular election. It's the very idea that you can challenge the status quo And the very idea that politics can be used to challenge those in power and to change the direction of politics, which actually, if you think about it, it should be what politics is about. But actually the whole agenda of those in power is to say, you lot, get back in your box and stop trying to change things, because this is the way it is, there is no alternative, and this is the way. And they want Tweedledee and Tweedledum politics where everyone's the same, and actually there's a little slight difference of nuance or whatever. What they don't want is people coming along putting a clear alternative to working people, saying if you vote for us, we are going to scrap the Trade Union Act. If you vote for us, we're going to lift the pay cap. If you vote for us, we're going to scrap tuition fees. Those clear messages were actually having a huge echo on the doorstep, and I think show that we can actually start to change things. Because to me, this is about what happens in 2 weeks' time is absolutely crucial. But it's also about a much bigger project than that. It's about recreating, rebuilding, revitalising the movement that we're all part of, the trade union and labour movement, to reimagine what we were created for, which was about making lives better for workers in the workplace and in the community, and having politics and politicians who are prepared to fight for that in local councils, in national parliaments and elsewhere. That's what this movement stood for and stands for and should stand for, and that's, I think, what the Corbyn movement offers the hope for us to do. And there has been some remarkable shifting in the past few days with this backtracking on the dementia tax. You know, if people saw Philip Hammond on the telly walking around like he's a dead man walking, because the press are all saying he's finished as soon as if they do win. Disagreements about how the manifesto was put together. Disagreements, criticisms even from elements of big business about elements of the parts of the Tory manifesto. There are lots of problems on their side, problems which will only get worse if they are re-elected, but actually problems that which our side need to turn to our advantage. So I think Labour is up 9 points in Wales in the latest poll, while the Tories are down 7. This was when, just a few weeks ago, they were telling us that the Tories were going to storm through Wales and everyone in Wales was going to become a Tory, and it's turning into the opposite. And that's some room for optimism. But there's no room for complacency. I've had both examples in terms of I've been out canvassing in my local ward in East London. I have had one person criticising Corbyn, but I had a fantastic, some of these flats are very hard for canvassers to get into these days with entry phones. So we got into one block of flats and I knocked on the door, and a guy came and said who it was. He said, I'm 47, I've never voted because I've got no time for politicians, but I am voting this time, for the first time in my life, I'm voting for Jeremy Corbyn. And that shows the sort of thing that can happen if we get organised and if we get out there and do the campaigning. To me, everything is to play for. If we do our work in the safe Labour seats, in the marginals, and at a national level, everything is to play for. That we can actually defeat the Tories. We can then put on the agenda the real idea about ordinary people, trade unionists, the people you work with, the people you represent, actually starting to have a say in what sort of direction politics should take, and what sort of world, what sort of country and world we want to live in. That's what the opportunity that was sparked a couple of years ago by Jeremy Corbyn's election, and is now, not on the timing of our choice, but through what our enemies have done to us, has given us the opportunity to actually put that on the agenda. And I say on that, no surrender on those issues, no giving up on those policies. That's what we're going to fight for. That's what we want to win next week. But whatever happens, we're going to fight to transform our movement, transform our party, and put working class ideas at the heart of British politics again. Thanks very much.